Ralph Goff, thanks for talking to us here at the Cipher Brief. It's always great to see you.
Hi, Suzanne. Good to see you as well. And greetings from sunny Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
Lovely place to be this time of year.
Yes.
Let's talk about a place where things are a little bit more strained. Antony Blinken recently said he believes that Israel has lost sovereignty in the north along its border with Lebanon. Do you think this is true? And if so, what can Israel do really short of an all-out war to get that territory back?
So, you know, I think that's a rather provocative statement, but and kind of unusual for this administration. So I think it shows the depth of the frustration that the administration is feeling, both with our Israeli allies and with Lebanese Hezbollah. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is that the Israelis and Lebanese Hezbollah are involved in a struggle that has its roots in what's happening in Gaza. So no settlement in Gaza, no settlement in northern Israel, southern Lebanon. And as far as the loss of sovereignty, like I said, I think that's a very dramatic statement, and I think it's meant to shock maybe both sides into drilling down more seriously into some sort of negotiations.
Are you comfortable with the level of engagement that you've seen so far or imagine is occurring behind the scenes from the U.S. side?
Comfort, I wouldn't say I'm comfortable with it, because there's always room for more, and there's always a question as to, the problem with being retired and no longer in the game is I don't have a real read on how serious the parties are. On the other hand, it's a good sign that the parties are engaged in, this, what we call espionage diplomacy behind the scenes, where you have the head of the Mossad leading for Israel, you have the head of CIA, Director Burns, very talented diplomat in his own right, leading, for the U.S. side, dealing with all the various parties in the region, the intermediaries for Hezbollah, the intermediaries for Hamas and Gaza. I mean, I think it's a great effort, but looming behind all of this, Suzanne, is the internal political dynamic of Israel itself.
Yeah, I'm going to get to that in just a minute, because I know you have some very strong opinions about what's going on. So I will get there. But before I do, let's talk a little bit more about this espionage diplomacy sort of behind the scenes. I mean, you were in government for a long time. You had a very interesting vantage point to how negotiations like this occur. What are the pros and cons of trying to negotiate a situation like this using this sort of espionage diplomacy, if you will?
So, personally, I believe there's more pros than there are cons, which is why I think espionage or intelligence diplomacy has become a much more common fixture in today's diplomatic arena. Bill Burns is the perfect candidate to lead a larger effort in this field because of his background as a diplomat with, high-level experience from his days as, State Department and his two terms as an ambassador, and now a very successful, I would say, head of CIA, right? The upside of it is that you can negotiate behind the scenes. You keep things from the press because, a lot of agreements hinge on when it gets announced to the public. Certain parts of any diplomatic agreement can be torpedoed, if you will, by being publicly released too soon. Particularly you look at Hamas down in Gaza, they're struggling for they're in an existential struggle. Lebanese Hezbollah up north, they're not in an existential struggle yet. The Israelis are not in an existential struggle yet. That would be more so if they were engaged with full-on war with Iran. But at the same time, there's a lot for all the different parties to lose there. And conducting discussions behind the scenes means you can table a lot of things. You can throw a lot of trial balloons out there. You can bring things to the point where you have an agreement, but nobody's signed it yet, right? And so it's kind of like you can take back everything and you can deny everything, right? If something gets leaked, if Hamas, for instance, is unhappy with something and something gets leaked, they can say, well, we never agreed to that, right? Whereas maybe they did behind the scenes. So all the parties kind of have a lot of wiggle room there, if you will, and it sets the stage, I think, for guys like Secretary of State Blinken to then take the ball across the goal line once all the parties seem to be in agreement. So I think this is why we see this tool being used more often by governments, particularly in that unstable arena of the Middle East. There's so much less to lose. Now, on the side for what can be lost are, you can spend so much time in this intelligence diplomacy that no real diplomacy gets achieved. I think that's probably the biggest risk there, is that, the heads of all the agencies, the spy agencies are meeting, they work out an agreement, and then meanwhile the military's, somebody bombs the wrong target or somebody kills the wrong person, and the next thing you know, a diplomatic solution is farther to be reached than before, and they ran out of time.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think it's great to have that context, because we've been seeing these headlines about, we may be very close to a negotiated settlement that would lead to the release of the hostages. And then that kind of just dies out of the headlines without any real explanation until it sort of comes back up to the top again. So it's interesting to have that context, Ralph. I want to get into sort of your thoughts on the internal politics. That, I wonder, and I'm going to ask this diplomatically, if you were advising Benjamin Netanyahu right now, who is facing increasing domestic pressure, a lot of international criticism about how he is executing this war, what would you advise him to do next?
Well, first, I probably would have resigned long ago, but he's not going to have anyone really advising him closely who disagrees with him, and unfortunately, this is the problem. There's a lot of people there who just want him to resign, who want that government to end. But he's got the far right who's urging him not just to not settle with Hamas, not settle with Hezbollah, but to double down, right? And the far right part of his government, people like his Ministry of Security and his Minister of Finance, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, they are the ones in the camp that want to double down. The far right, the orthodox elements of the government, they see opportunity here, right? The war with Lebanon, they see this as an opportunity. The war with Gaza, that's an opportunity to crush Hamas, and that's one that, frankly, I kind of agree with. The war in Lebanon, they see this as an opportunity to crush Lebanese Hezbollah. But I think the danger in that thinking is that Hezbollah is not Hamas. Hezbollah is much larger, much more capable. And when you take on Hezbollah, you're taking on Iran. So there's a lot of risk there for Israel. And I think the far right discounts that a lot. And you have the political critics who say, well, Bibi Netanyahu just wants a war anyways, because he wants, the longer there's war, the longer he stays in power. Yeah, okay, there's some elements of truth to that. But for all his faults, I don't think Bibi is that reckless. Maybe he'll prove me wrong. In his desperate bids to stay in power, perhaps he will prove me wrong. I hope not. I hope the Bibi of old emerges at some point, when he was a very pragmatic politician, where he can come out and actually help step back from the brink of war there.
Yeah, I know all eyes will be on his next moves, as they have been, quite frankly, since the beginning of this war on October 7th of last year. Ralph, I'm curious, you just mentioned Hezbollah. I mean, they're better equipped, they're bigger, they're backed by Iran. Iran just is now welcoming a new president after the death of their former president in a helicopter crash in May. Will that have any impact on anything regarding the relationship with Iran and Hezbollah, or not really?
Yeah, it always will. But, I think things aren't that easy for Iran either. I mean, as you just alluded to, President Raisi was killed in the helicopter crash. They just had elections with the person who, from all the analysis I've seen, the person who won the elections was not necessarily the top choice of, the hardliners. But, at the same time, we shouldn't kid ourselves that he's some sort of reformist, in wolf's clothing there, right? But meanwhile, the Iranians are still trying to sort out their political landscape. And, looming over that is the very poor showing by their strategic forces when they launched their rocket, missile, and drone attack on Israel. I mean, what was it, 99.9% of their projectiles were intercepted and destroyed, with causing very little damage in Iran and inside Israel. I think they expected a high percentage of them to be destroyed, but I don't think the Iranians in their wildest dreams thought nearly every one of them would fail to reach a target. So, they've got to sit back and say, our main strategic arsenal is not going to get the job done. And anyone in IRGC who's arguing to the contrary is delusional. Right? So, the Iranians, I think they're going to have to step back and think about things and think about what their viable courses of action will be. And in the meantime, again, it all goes right back to Gaza. If the Israelis can't wrap things up in Gaza, the turmoil in the north and combat with Hezbollah is not going to end.
Yeah. If full-scale conflict breaks out between Israel and Hezbollah, do you think, Ralph, that it's a foregone conclusion that the U.S. will have to get involved? Or can Israel's military deal with a direct conflict with Hezbollah on its own?
So it'll depend on how the war unravels. If it's mostly an Israeli incursion into Lebanon and most of the fighting takes part north of the border, you'll see, I think, very little participation by U.S. forces. Right? We don't want to get involved in a war in southern Lebanon. We don't want our fingerprints on an Israeli war in southern Lebanon. If, however, Lebanese Hezbollah can project that war inside Israel proper, yeah, we'll probably see some participation by CENTCOM forces in the region. And, and this has always been a problem too, Suzanne, for Israel, is that, whenever the IDF is writing checks against Hezbollah and Hamas, some of those checks are going to have to be cashed by CENTCOM if they're not careful. So, this is one where the Israelis will have to carefully weigh how much U.S. participation, A, they want, B, they need, and see how much the region can tolerate.
Yeah, absolutely. What else is on your mind that I have not asked you?
So Israel itself, I think, people are worried that Israel will get involved in a three-front war, right, with Gaza, with Lebanese Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, also in the West Bank, right? And I think the two areas to watch are what's happening in the West Bank. I think the offensive actions of the settlers and the extremists, who they see a big opportunity here. While everyone's distracted with Hezbollah, and when everyone's distracted by Hamas, they see an opportunity to seize territory in the West Bank, right? Or, Judea and Samaria, as Israelis refer to it. And I think that's a problem because you still have IDF incursions on a near daily or nightly basis there. You have many more Palestinians being killed than Israelis. Right? That's an imbalance. And this is one of those areas that simmers, and when it boils over, can actually be could actually eclipse the violence going on in northern Israel that would drag in other powers in the region. Right? It causes a great deal of heartburn, for instance, with Jordan. It causes a great deal of heartburn with Egypt and with other countries in the region too, who, none of them like Hamas, but they do not have that same level of hostility towards the Palestinian Authority. In fact, the only power that's really hostile to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank would be the Netanyahu government, which has done its level best to undermine the Palestinian Authority and create this power vacuum in the West Bank, which is in nobody's best interest right now.
Yeah. Ralph Goff, thanks for sharing some of your thoughts on what you'll be watching for as these headlines continue to develop with the Cipher Brief. It's always good to see you, my friend. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Suzanne.